with a journal. She's also an advisory member of ASEN. Gordana is a senior lecturer at the London Metropolitan University and has published widely on theories of nation and nationalism, nationalism in Croatia and the Balkans, and qualitative and quantitative research methods. Her publications include The Development of Croatian Nation, and with another long-standing ASEN member, Atsuki Ichio, When is the Nation Towards an Understanding of Theories of Nationalism? The title of Gordana's talk today is National Traitresses, Estrangement and Redefinition of National Moral Boundaries. Gordana, over to you.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank ASEN, Mr. President, and Executive Committee. It's a kind of, definitely David somewhere is hiding for organizing this. It's a kind of emotional moment for me, because last time I was here was 30 years ago. And 30 years ago, there were two events that completely changed the trajectory of my life. First of all, I heard that I was accepted, me and another 9 students, to be the first generation of nationalism study PhD students. Second, here in CEU. Second was 2 months into the program when our supervisor, Ernst Gellner, died. And then academic community rose up and rehomed us, all 10 of us. We went from UCLA to Ireland, Cork, Cambridge, and I ended up at LSE with Professor Anthony Smith. Very soon I was incorporated into ASEN activities, and 30 years of voluntary labor made my ASEN career more dynamic than my academic career. Anyway, I strongly urge younger generations to get involved into all of these ASEN activities. It's a wide range of activities that you can find. Wonderful group of people dedicated to promote nationalism. No, wait, against, never mind. Anyway, today I'm going to talk to you about national traitresses, and kind of except the gender, it continues to on what Erin was talking to yesterday about. It's about Henry Kissinger on the Chinese wall, but just imagine Henry Kissinger, woman. So, taking into account my background, I think it would be only appropriate to start with a quote from Ernst Gellner. So in his seminal work, Nations and Nationalism, he stated that whenever nationalism has taken the root, it has tended to prevail with ease over other modern ideologies. Nationalism is often described as the most successful modern ideology in the history, apparently, of the humankind. And even in the situations, in the societies that self-proclaim themselves to be liberal, neoliberal, socialist, Islamist, in any other form, they still, nationalism turns to be the kind of the moral, or if you want, responsible for delimiting territorial and cultural boundaries of the society. Many scholars attributed this, as Malevich says, by the way, one of the 10 from the beginning of the story, that the potency of nationalism comes from its ability to adapt and metamorphose so as to dovetail with distinct and often contradictory official doctrines. I will argue here that the power of nationalism as an ideology lies not only in its ability to adapt and metamorphose, but also in its capacity to denigrate, to exclude competing meanings, the capacity to purge values and norms that threaten the primacy of loyalty to the nation and national moral framework. This process, I will maintain, can best be described as the process of estrangement, of ideologically incompatible co-nationals, often labeled as national traitors. I will try to demonstrate workings of the process of estrangement through the example of how nationalism denigrates and expurgates feminism. Most of my examples will come from my home country, from the period of so-called homeland war, the beginning of the 1990s in Croatia. And I will use qualitative analysis, mostly of the mainstream media from that period of time. After being labeled a traitress, on November 1st of 1991, Mira Furlan, soon to be actress in exile, wrote a public letter to her co-citizens and posted this question. How many friends will one betray so not to commit big, the only recognized national betrayal? How many little human betrayals one needs to commit so that one maintains clean in front of one's nation? Some of you science fiction buffs, nerds and whatever, Steve, you can recognize her, yes, from Babylon 5 iconic series, right? But more importantly for us here, in this question, Furlan is kind of implying that not all betrayals are the same, that the severity of betrayal can be ranked. She talks about little human betrayals of friends, little human betrayals that can be compared or cannot be compared to the big one, the betrayal of one's nation. Together with cruelty, hypocrisy, snobbery, and misanthropy, Judith Sclair lists treachery as one of the ordinary vices. These days, social media platforms attest to this. I don't know if you've been recently on social media, but you can see traitors everywhere. And by the way, these are just from April X, Twitter posts. Practically, there is no active politician today that was not labeled by someone as a traitor, national traitor, and so on. But Kelly and Thiraganama state how treachery is reproduced in the grey zones of political life, and I don't think you can get greyer in politics than these days. The label of national traitor is with ease awarded to those that criticize presidents, prime minister, ministers, generals on the field, and so on. It is labeled as natural traitors those who are perceived that at any point weaken the state of the nation, of the state, of the minister, president, and so on. Presidents themselves and prime ministers these days were labeled as national traitors, or the president himself labels national traitors those who try to prosecute his crimes. In any case, the source of this kind of wide range of traitors must be lying in the nature of the phenomena. Very simply, Ben Yehuda defines betrayal as violation of trust and loyalty. However, rules of what trust is and how loyalty is maintained are usually culturally specific. Generally, we know trust is something you earn, and loyalty is something usually that you owe to someone. Those who are scholars of betrayal, they usually talk about personal or collective betrayals. On a personal level, we usually talk about infidelity, adultery, snitching, informing, and things like that. But on a collective level, we talk about collaboration, desertion, treason, whistleblowing, turncoating, and things like that. There is also a distinction many would make between legal framework of a treason and moral treason. However, even there, the boundaries are rather blurred. You can ask Julian Assange about that. In any case, personal betrayals are usually seen as violations of shared interests and identities, and collective betrayals are violations of sense of an imagined community, of collective identities, memories, and things like that. Of course, I'm going to be mostly interested in the collective forms of betrayal. But in any case, all of them were considered to be some forms of breaches of some of the highest values that define moral community. And indeed, Grichenko and Narvelius define betrayal in those terms as transgression of moral limits, political borders, and symbolic boundaries. And while we all abhor treachery, the fact is that almost all, if not all, modern nation states are built on act of treason. Somebody broke some loyalty to establish independent nation and kind of a nation state and so on. Some societies, and in some periods of times, in especially conflict, produce more traitors than usual. Russia is particularly productive these days. The situation of war and turn and conflict often involves shifting both territorial borders and moral and symbolic boundaries on the imagined community. And with changing boundaries, the meanings of trust and loyalties change as well. The betrayal, however, is context-dependent and has to be interpreted. As the French diplomat Talleyrand famously remarked, treason is a matter of dates. Heroes of today could easily be traitors of tomorrow. Just look at around this city, what happened to the statues of Lenin after 1990. But the fact that treason is a matter of dates turns attention not to acts of treason, but more effectively on the acts of production of traitors. Scholars that deal with issues of betrayal often emphasize social function of this production of traitors. So, for example, Ekström talks about how a production of traitors produces scapegoats and removes undesirables. Chernobrov talks about how it creates silence and excluded groups, also how it builds feeling of certainty and security, how Ben Yehuda talks how it strengthens the cohesion and integration of the culture's moral perception. Kelly and Thiranagama talk about how it maps the moral boundaries of the state and the people in whose name they speak. All of them imply that the production of the traitor is a form of social control. If the treason is matter of dates, then the accusation of treason is matter of power. Every form of betrayal, therefore, rests on the relationship between the betrayed, the betrayer, and it's framed within the public discourse of betrayal. Since the roles of betrayed and betrayer are defined by power and date, I'm more interested in the public discourse of the betrayer. The public discourse sets the hierarchy of values and makes some loyalties of higher or lower importance, some betrayers morally more repugnant and some much less so. Just think about how much you just shrug when you hear that your friend was gossiping about you. Little human, everyday betrayals. When the betrayal of the nation is in the question, the public discourse that defines loyalty of the nation as the supreme moral value we usually refer to as ideology of nationalism. The proliferation of national traitors is usually a good sign of blossoming nationalist ideology. Now, we know that in theories of nations and nationalism there is practically no consensus about almost everything. But if there is any consensus, it would be that the core of understanding nationalism lies in division between us and them. Very basic, but hey, we'll take anything. The social mechanisms, whatever you subscribe to, the war, the education system, culture and tradition, imagining or inventing, remembering or forgetting, whatever, they all define the borders and boundaries of inclusion and exclusion. While us, are routinely defined by nationalist ideologies through genealogy, culture, language, history, citizenship, or any combination of these, other them, the stranger, the foreigner, coloniser, ethnic minority, however you name them, is also often perceived as enemy of the nation or, at best, a threat. While we construct boundaries of trust, solidarity, loyalty, the other lies beyond the limits of social obligation and therefore is often exposed to any violation. Consequently, any shift in territorial borders and social or cultural boundaries between us and them necessitates a corresponding shift in trust, solidarity, and loyalty. Social processes, often labeled as othering, redefine and reinforce these distinctions. Typically, they rely on ethnic, racial, religious, or linguistic signifiers to construct or reconstruct symbolic boundaries between groups. Nationalist ideologies frequently define such objective criteria of belonging, ranging from appropriate accent to appropriate ancestors. Where these criteria, we know since Frederick Barth, are very much socially constructed, relational, and definitely situational. But national traitors are one of us. They have appropriate accents. They have appropriate ancestors and the right blood cells. National traitors are often those who were, until yesterday, the best of us. As Kelly and Thiraganama state, the traitor lies not so much at the margins or beyond the nation, but at its heart. She or he is not a stranger, the common enemy. Traitors are not different, but perversely the same. Theories of nationalism has predominantly focused on the often violent processes of othering within political and social life. They tend to overlook an equally potent perception of the threat posed by sameness, especially when that sameness is perceived as deviant. The perceived betrayal of those who are familiar, close, and intimate unsettles the very foundation of social cohesion. And this is a good place to introduce our case study. So in the first half of the 1990s, Croatian nation was focused on achieving their 1,000 years old dream of independent statehood. Like every birth, it was very bloody and very painful. This homeland war, as it was known, was war against Serbian insurrectionists, paramilitary groups and the Serbian army, but it is a narrative of a rise of Croatian heroes and Serbian villains. Not that much is written about national traitors, but at that time there were loads of them. And there was lots of public discussions, public media, TV, newspapers, and so on that were regularly printing articles talking about national traitors. The most vitriolic public attacks happened at the beginning of 1990s, so the beginning of the war, against Mira Furlan, the actress from the beginning of the story, Slavenka Drakulić and Dubravka Ugrešić, two icons of the modern Croatian literature, Rada Iveković, a prominent Croatian academic, philosopher, Vesna Kesić, Jelena Lovrić, two renowned Croatian journalists. 5 of them will very soon also be known as witches from Rio. Boris Dežulović, their colleague writer, to paraphrase him, he was talking about Mira Furlan, but he noticed that they had something in common. They were talented and thinking human beings, thinking and independent and female. Most of the scholars of the sociology of betrayal specifically note, either in the main text or somewhere in a footnote, that the treatment of national traitors is gendered. And here we have Kelly and Thiranagama talking specifically that women are made the repositories for complex, potent, and often violent ideas about betrayal and national belonging. Hence, the case study somehow, for me, presented itself, right? So what I will try to do now is to demonstrate the mechanism of the process that I called estrangement, through the example of how nationalist discourse employs misogyny to establish supremacy over feminist discourse and system of values. The estrangement, in this context, is a process of internal othering. It's a process where nationalist ideology denigrates and excludes competing meanings. And the estranged individual can be seen as a mirror image of Simmel's stranger. They share many characteristics. They are both, the stranger and estranged, both inner enemies. They are both wanderers. They are both kind of defined by the unity of nearness and remoteness, but in the reverse. Simmel's stranger is the one who is far and is actually near, but the estranged one is near but becomes far. While the stranger comes today and stays tomorrow, the estranged has always been here but will leave tomorrow. Whereas the stranger will never truly belong, the estranged no longer belongs. The estranged is neither a marginal figure nor objective participant, as the stranger is, but rather a subjective outcast. Simmel describes how the stranger imports quality into the group which do not and cannot stem from the group. In contrast, the position of the estranged is defined by a quality that should no longer stem from the group itself. Another crucial distinction between the stranger and the estranged lies in their social function. As Bauman says, the Simmelian stranger disrupts the inside-outsider order, but the estranged reinforces national moral boundaries. The estrangement process happens in 3 stages. First stage is discreditation of old moral boundaries, of targeted norms and values. Then it moves to shifting the estranged individuals and their values beyond the boundary of inclusion. And then finally redefines new moral boundaries through punishment and discipline. So in its first stage, it starts with accusation of treason. The accusation of treason against Croatian prominent women was framed through typical construction of the narrative of a traitor who is a deserter, who sleeps with the enemy, and the one who slanders the nation. Let me give you a few examples. Very soon after the beginning of witch hunt, prosecution, almost all of these traitresses left Croatia. It was unbearable to live there. However, the public media described that as immigration with scholarship. Globus, one of the main magazines at that time, said she packed her suitcases and left when she realized it was no longer possible to eat a plate of pasta or drink a glass of red wine in Zagreb without disturbance. Implying how it's the inconvenience of the war that made them leave rather than actual prosecution of the media globus itself. Typical deserters. They also found that they published all kinds of private details about the life of these traitresses. And the same magazine found it important to print details about their partners and their ethnicities of their partners. So it said, quote, Rada Ivekovic, a Serb from Belgrade. Slavenka Drakulic, twice a Serb from Croatia. Jelena Lovric, a Serb from Croatia. Framed like this, the article concludes, it was a systematic political choice, not a random choice based on love. As for slandering the nation, the term witches from Rio came apparently that in Rio de Janeiro, in the Congress, a Penn Congress, these 5 witches apparently were slandering their nation. Večernji List was one of the most popular daily newspapers at the time, and he accused them of snitching on Croatia to the world and attempting to portray Croatia as an illegal state, wandering the world and pouring out poison over their own country. Such a narrative paints a picture of a typical national traitor. But the open misogyny in these lines does not really address the moral issue that triggered the witch hunt. So still asking, like, why? The nationalist discourse has been utilized to frame a particular incident with a specific moral concern that warrants policing and denunciation. This was the article that triggered the witch hunt. The prosecution of 5 prominent Croatian writers was framed within the context of their alleged failure to recognize the weaponized mass rapes in Bosnia as acts of Serbian genocide. The title of the main article that triggered these attacks was "Croatian Feminists Are Raping Croatia." The choice of words is far from accidental. The issue of weaponized rape as a military tactics during the war in Croatia and Bosnia was the center of national and international debate. One reason these particular writers and journalists were labeled as national traitresses was their refusal to attribute these heinous war crimes exclusively to Serbian tactics. The same article argued the truth that in Bosnia, girls, women, and elderly women are raped and killed not because they are women, but because they are non-Aryan, because they are not Serbs, because they are Croats and Muslims. The refusal to interpret rape in ethnic, national, rather than gender terms earned them the label of being rapists themselves, casting them as perpetrators of moral rape and Croatia, or Croatian nation, as their victim. The framing of feminism, this accusation of treason, constructs this a narrative that ideology of feminism and nationalism are utterly and fundamentally incompatible, and does that in at least 3 ways. First, it reflects this patriarchal norm in which sexual violence perpetrated by men against women is perceived as a women's issue, one that must be addressed by women and particularly by feminists. Second, the assertion that this atrocity is primarily a crime against women by men rather than a crime committed by one nation against another directly contradicts the nationalist value system, which prioritizes nationalist belonging above all else. Finally, the claim that mass weaponized rape is a consequence of nationalist ideology itself rather than specific Serbian nationalist ideology is regarded as by nationalist pundits as an act of betrayal against their nation. The accusers invoke rape either in the context of weaponized rapes in Bosnia or as a metaphor for national betrayal of the accused women. In neither cases, the focus is on women's experience. In this instance, as in previous cases of similar atrocities, the actual victimization of the woman, as Ruth Harris states, was transformed into representation of a violated but innocent female nation. These prominent Croatian women are seen as failing their moral obligations because they prioritize the interests of women over those of the nation, and as such are regarded as double traitors. Traitors not only to their nation, but also to their gender. By disqualifying the 5 writers as national traitresses, the authors of these articles discredit the value of feminism. What was once familiar and close now appears strange and distant. In the second stage, the process of estrangement shifts moral boundaries to ensure that the estranged individuals and their system of values find themselves beyond that boundary. That was done mostly with 2 techniques. The stigmatization, labeling of morality, intellectual integrity, femininity, the intellect of the accused, and shaming. Traitresses' choices in private life, their sexuality, their appearance, and their assumed lack of respectability and character. It was not merely a figure of speech that labels the 5 prominent women as witches. Witches have always been perceived as an enemy within. Labeling someone a witch does not only expel them from the community, but it also denies them humanity. In contemporary national rhetoric, terms such as witch hunt, witch trials, and so on, are predominantly used as metaphors, luckily. However, the negative associations with the term witch continues to produce, at best, censorship and self-censorship, and barriers barriers whenever we turn, or at worst, hostility and even violence. Within the nationalist and predominantly Catholic community of Croatia, the term witch signifies evil and morally something that has to be exorcised out of the community. Slavenka Drakulic explained, we were labeled witches because we were feminists. In her essays entitled Pitanje optike, the question of optics, Dubravka Ugrasic listed 51 labels that her colleagues, Croatian writers, journalists, and critics, have used to describe her personally. Many of these 51 forms of naming are gendered. One of the most significant writers in the Croatian modern history, whose work has been translated in really many languages, her work published in many internationally acclaimed journals and so on, magazines, was described by Croatian mainstream media as self-absorbed, middle-aged, as an old woman, as the one who nitpicks, gossips, denounces, a whiner, a witch, a frustrated, and a furious woman, and a person for whom only bonfire can warm her heart. In these accusations, witches were routinely associated with sexual promiscuity. Reading these newspapers, I was wondering in how many ways can, in the public media, a woman be called a whore. This is just a few that I found appropriate for this audience. Mira Furlan was openly referred to as easy woman. The articles portrayed her as naturally predisposed to the role of a prostitute. She was characterized as looking for deeper relationships regardless of their frequency. Some of the accused were described as having difficulty finding partners despite their physical appearance. One journalist characterized the 5 accused as married without children or old and unmarried. Mira Furlan's body was described as baroque and the result of one of the most successful operations in the history of cosmetic surgery. These are all techniques that Kate Mann calls down girls techniques of labeling and shaming, and they were employed in this witch hunt that produced sensations that Slavenka Drakulic described as feeling publicly raped. Not only did she felt publicly violated, but this violation occurred in silence. She wrote, I will always remember that terrible feeling of loneliness, that feeling of being all alone, exposed, and that no one was lifting a finger. The estranged individual is unable to hear the voices of the community from the other side of the boundary. The third and final stage involves redrawing boundaries through punishment. That is usually done through public spectacle, the traitors are used as examples, and through silencing, spatial and epistemic erasure from the community. For those who perceive national treason as the gravest form of betrayal, it is a crime beyond redemption. Such traitors serve as example, tool for disciplining those who may still be reformed into, as Foucault called them, docile and useful members of the nation. Foucault asserts, the guilty person is not only one of the targets of punishment. For punishment is directed above all at others, at all the potential guilty. Not only that this form of betrayal necessitates the punishment of transgression to prevent future violations, but also to restore the order. This power to punish can potentially be exercised by anyone, any useful and docile body, from journalists that can pour misogyny on the pages of the public media to a passerby who can spit on the door of the witch. Nationalism, and the power of nationalism, is that it invites all true members of the nation to actively participate in policing these newly reaffirmed national values. The effect of this process of estrangement is easily observed on micro level of individuals' actions and thoughts. The accused Croatian national traitors, all except Jelena Lovrić, left Croatia. So physically, they left the space. They were silenced from Croatian, within the Croatian boundaries, moral and cultural boundaries. But not only physical. First of all, Mira Furlan was fired, and she was banned from any from taking place in any acting in the Croatian National Theatre. Two writers, Slavenka Drakulić and Dubravka Ugrašić, published in many languages, not in Croatian. For a long time, their work was not published. The academics also left Croatia. There were nothing published in Croatian. They published a lot in other languages, gave speeches and so on, not in Croatian language. The journalists very soon lost the platform because many of these oppositional newspapers were either very quickly brought to the line or they were just extinguished. So not only that they were physically removed, they were removed from cultural discourse. However, things change with time. Somewhere with the end of the war and with the change of radical government, most of these women came back with a rather lukewarm apologies for those who were creators of this persecution. However, in my view, this micro level of individual actions and thoughts are not the main effect of the estrangement as a process. The macro effect of the level of public discourse is what kind of is a true effect of estrangement as a process. In the Croatian nation today, so 30-something years since the war, the process of estrangement turned feminism into trope. The accused women were repeatedly labeled as Croatian feminists or even anti-Croatian feminists. The newspapers were depicting the movement, feminism, as a pet project of the communist regime and characterized it as an intellectual sect. The accusers dismantled or dismissed feminism perspective as mere ramblings about the war of the sexes and referred to the movement as jaded feminist circle. The Croatian mainstream media directly critiqued the actions of both Croatian and international feminists during this war. They proclaimed that the feminist movement morally died in the Balkan wars of the 90s. Feminists were accused of turning their own, inverted comma, prosecution into an international spectacle. The label feminist became a trope designed to delegitimize feminist arguments even before the argument begins. Angry feminist, feminazi. I'm quite sure you're familiar with some of them, if not all. Without engaging with any discussion on values and norms held by feminism, nationalist discourse undermined entire feminist politics by making its cost personal. Tomlinson argues that repetition of these tropes form a part of what she calls a cultural training process. I would argue that the other and probably the crucial part of that cultural training process is the process of estrangement. In this process of estrangement, it is this process of estrangement through which nationalism as an ideology banishes competing systems of meaning on the other side of national moral boundaries by framing those who uphold those norms and values as national traitors. Nationalism does not only routinely employ misogyny to keep in check feminism, but it also, for example, uses xenophobia to delegitimize norms and value of multiculturalism, or it uses anti-elitism and anti-intellectualism to denigrate norms of globalism. Nationalism prevails with ease over other modern ideologies, not only because of its ability to adapt and metamorphose, but also because of its ability to ruthlessly expurgate its competitors. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Gordana. Now we have about 40 minutes for Q&A. So maybe we can collect 2 or 3 questions and then give a chance to Gordana to reply.
Thank you, Gordana. It was an absolutely brilliant paper and very brave. I just wanted to say, to ask rather, whether the situations that, the cases that you examined were very specific cases of crisis. You know, in times of war, one has to take sides. And this is exactly what Jacques Plamenat had said a long time ago. That nationalism expresses itself when the chips are down and when you have to choose to take sides. Otherwise, you're shot down. So that's what I wanted to ask you, whether this is this situation of creating victims of traitors, seeing people was just in this specific, applies to that specific case, when you, situation where you cannot have gray zones. You have to take sides.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm going to just, otherwise I'll forget. Okay. I'm an old woman. Probably it was true at the time when Plamenas was active, before social media. If you open up pages of social media, you will find out that the production of traitors is literally every day. That the production of traitors happen even in the moments when there is no war, there is no open crisis, or maybe we live in situations of permanent crisis. But in any case, I use this particular example because it was in a good old type of media, printed media, right? But if you take a look at what's happening, the analysis of the treason as a label and so on, and you can find this many analysis on the social media posts and so on, and it's a really blossoming job. So yes, I think the problem with Plamenat's view is that at that time the only voices you could hear was official media. Newspapers, TV and things like that were the main kind of, unless it's a political party, Congress or something like that coming from the top, right? That's the only open signals of production of national traitors. But with open spaces as social media, I think the process is not only designed for ultimate crisis of war and the necessity of taking sides, but you can see that in many cases just a pure critique of some actions of the government and so on can earn you a witch hunt.
Thank you. That was fantastic. Thank you so much for this talk. Towards the end, no, actually, in the concluding part, you just said nationalism is trying to, it's been basically trying to denigrate feminism as a competitor. And that triggered my question. So the nationalism and feminism are ideology working at the same level, of the same order, or it's a different, substantively, qualitatively different kind of way of thinking about the world?
I think that they are both ideologies that seek loyalties. And in some situations, if nationalism sees that feminism is kind of taking the loyalty or primacy of loyalty to the nation, to loyalty to a gender, right? That it reacts and can react very brutally. Does that explain? So in situations when the basic value system of nationalism are questioned by feminists, for example, rape here was an example, right? Which was defined in the terms of gender rather than by these women, rather than in the terms of nation, right? Then nationalism can act not as necessarily as metamorphose and adopt, but can also brutally attack views of another ideology. So there is a clash there of interest, if you want, overlapping in that case.
Thank you so much for your talk. My question follows a little bit on what you were just exploring now in your response to the previous question, which is this idea or the concept of female nationalism and what kind of role it might play. So is it, so I feel especially in Western Europe, we have lived through many years of kind of what has been called a female nationalist political discourse, right? So this idea that somehow Western Europeans are so enlightened and, you know, that we can now tell everybody else, no one else respects women's rights as we do, and therefore we can justify all these exclusionary policies primarily directed at migrants on a feminist claim, right? So how do you see that phenomenon? Perhaps how does it relate to the story that you've told us? Is it that just a docile feminism that is co-opted, and that when it comes to the crunch, this conjuncture will pass and nationalism will reassume its true face, which you know, when it comes to the crunch, or how do you see this phenomenon? I suppose is my question. Thank you.
I shouldn't be surprised that the discussion is, of course, naturally going to feminism and issues of feminism versus nationalism, though that was not my attempt. I wanted to say that nationalism does that to almost every other ideology. Feminism is not, being feminist is not the only trope. Being liberal, you are a globalist, and things like that. All of those became tropes in political debate. All of them kind of removed the discussion of the nature of globalism, feminism, and so on by just being, you've been disqualified from the discussion by being awarded a label. So that's what I wanted to say, that the estrangement is doing as an essential process that is quite often triggered by nationalism discourse in order to disqualify other views of how world should operate, what should be the major values and so on in our society. They're disqualified before or any kind of debate starts. So that was my attention. Now, as for feminism, it's very interesting that you said, because one of the people who I gave, my friend who read this paper first, he said, yeah, but you should take a look that there are some liberal nationalisms who embrace feminism. And for example, take a look what happens as they are criticizing anti-feminist kind of cultures and so on in protection of women's rights and so on. So it pointed at Roger Brubaker paper on civilizationalism. I don't know if you read it, where one of the example was how I think is Norwegian nationalists, or could be Swedish. I'm really sorry and apologize to Roger Brubaker, I guess. Was it Swedish? Yeah. Where there were like liberal nationalist, feminist positions that, but they were Islamists. Yesterday, I learned the term, and I'm very grateful for panelists in yesterday's Nation and Gender panel. It's called femonationalism. So that would be the proper term, femonationalism. Nationalism that was not really, again, oriented towards the rights of women, as it is oriented against certain cultures, usually seen as other, culturally other, either by religion or so on, not to uphold to apparently high standard of Western cultures. So it's not really the focus on rights of women. It's focused on who are we, on defining of the nation. So it is a form of nationalism rather than feminism in that case. That's my view.
I think we have some questions at the back there.
I can't see anyone. Who are you?
Testing.
Yeah. Great, thank you. My question is about, thank you so much for your lecture and interesting topic. And my question is about this practice of, or concept of spectacle, media spectacle, as I'm also kind of doing some stuff on that. And is it just something visible or hyper-visible, which is like widely circulated, or there is something else to that, and in the context of your work too? Thank you.
Sorry, I'm not quite sure what you are asking me specifically.
Just the concept of spectacle, public spectacle, international spectacle, you mentioned. Is it just something hyper-visible, visible, which is widely circulated, or there is something else to that, except being just visible, making it visible?
Okay. Well, I think I refer to public spectacle as a form of punishment itself. As one of the accused herself was talking about her own experience of being publicly exposed, as literal words where I felt as being publicly raped. So it's not just a spectacle towards others, but it is incredible punishment, I feel, towards those who are publicly kind of exposed, definitely in this way. So there is more to just being spectacle, entertainment. I think it is also, and definitely from their own words, it's punishment itself. It's the personal cost. That's what I thought.
One more question at the back.
Hello. Thank you for your presentation. I was really impressed and delighted. I want to ask a question which is quite similar to this question about feminationalism. I just wondering, have you noticed the nationalist practices of producing the practice of appropriating feminism and producing the real feminism, the so-called real feminism, or the common sense feminism that would fight for the national cause and I don't know. I mean, this practice, because I know a lot of examples from, for example, German context or the Polish context or even the British context in the interwar period. Have you noticed something like that in Croatian context?
Absolutely, but we have the classics, I would call them, from 1990s and earlier, of scholars who were particularly dealing with nationalism and gender. Some of them kind of noted that every nationalism is kind of sexist. That reliant on tradition, the notions of golden age, the order and the cultural norms and rules and roles that necessarily involves some gender roles as defined in patriarchal way. That was kind of implied in many theories on gender and nation. Almost every nationalist discourse at some point defined what a true woman is. Usually defined as a mother, daughter, but always in relation to other. Right? Being mother is mother to someone, being daughter and things like that. So not as an individual woman, but always in relation to others. And as such, is quite often in nationalist discourse seen as having particular duties, not towards herself, but towards that relations to other right? So even in this femonationalism, it's all about, not about the woman, it's nothing to do about them, it's about nation. Nation is the main character here that has to be saved, that has to be protected, that has to uphold morality, but the morality of the woman is morality of the nation or of the family, of the husband, of the man. Right? That honor of the man is something that a woman has to provide quite often. So women are very much in the center of nationalist discourse, but not as individuals necessarily, but always in relation to somebody else, to the nation, to the family, to the role of the men and so on. So in Croatian, you have absolutely the same discourse. The discourse of a woman as that has to be responsible for, if you want, physical perpetuation of the nation. The issue of the fact that Croats are kind of in number diminishing. Literally in within 10 years census, there are apparently 500,000 Croats less, which doesn't have to be too much if you think about, I don't know, maybe population of Britain and so on. But overall, when you have 4 million Croats, then 500,000 is a lot. And that kind of role and blame goes towards women. Right? So not as women as individuals, but women as mothers of future Croats and so on. So yes, there is always some kind of a rhetoric of what a true Croatian woman is. For me, it was interesting to note, and that, by the way, is not only in this particular case study, but in many case studies that you can read about national discourse and issues of gender. And that is that women were quite often seen as double traitors. That you cannot just be a traitor of the nation. If you are a traitor of the nation, you are very directly traitor of the gender as well, because you are not a true woman. I'm not saying that it's not also applied to the men in this way, but by the way, when I say gender, I don't mean that treason is gendered only towards women. It's all very much gendered towards men as well. Labels of treason directly hit to masculinity, notions of masculinity. So my case study is this. So I'm not denying the both sides of the being gendered in that respect. Sorry, I went on.
Do we have more questions at the back, Dave?
Hi, thank you. This was amazing. So my question is about like kind of broader theoretical processes there, like more specifically about agencies. So like probably we want to get back to this kind of three like big Venn diagram that includes betrayed and betrayer here. So it's like betrayers are definitely sacrifice. I know you focus on this public discourse only, but it's kind of easy to understand for this betrayer side because like they were the ones who were sacrificing discourse. I want to hear your thought about this, the betrayed, right? So they are the drivers, right? They are the drivers like generating all this public discourses. So what do they want by doing this, right? So so it's like what's their goal, and then why they started this processes, and then who they are, and then what they get in this all this trader making processes. Thank you.
I kind of didn't want to talk about this. I'll tell you why. Because the article that you've seen on that I gave you the picture of is written by a sociologist, Dr. Slaven Letica. We learned that years after. It was published anonymously. Years later, it turns out that it was published by a sociologist who was at that time of the was one of the main advisors to the president of Croatian state. So we are not talking about some kind of trolls on, kind of in the basement of a mother's house that has nothing better to do but to kind of, spread misogyny and things like that. We are talking about some of the main political activists. The other article that slandered terribly Mira Furlan, was written by a journalist who today is also a very kind of famous journalist in Croatia today, and was then as well. In a journal that was considered, the main editor-in-chief was also one of the main publishing personality in Croatia for decades. We are not talking about anonymous people, though they tried to be anonymous, but they were politically active, and I would say they had strict agenda. They had their own agenda in promoting particular nationalist narrative. So the fact that we know who are the authors, and you have to bear in mind that this was published not only in that journal, but one of the most popular daily newspaper. Even if there was no necessarily signed author, there is an editorial team that we know who they are. They know that they are active creators of public discourse in Croatia at that time. So I hope that answers your question.
I think we have one question here, Dave, and then a couple at the back there, but I think...
Here. Thanks a lot. Great talk. I'm looking forward to read the whole paper. So basically, I'll just flip things around. When you mentioned at the very beginning that it's a top-down approach and people who have political and social leverage and power, they would call someone a traitor, and it can get effective. But have you found any other examples of a bottom-up approach? Because when you have the omnipresent discourse that someone is a traitor, that someone betrays the nation or a political space, that it gets spread to the public. And the public also feels responsible for, defending that territory or certain space. So not going that back in the past, but like it happened in Yugoslavia with the clash of Infobiro, when people were totally encouraged to send anonymous letters to secret police and so on. And it has a gender component as well, because a lot of women were arrested and then detained at St. Gergor. So have you found any examples of this discourse spread in media that happened in the 90s that comes from bottom point of view, like from organizations, individuals, and so on? Because then it shows the perception and embracement of this policy that was created by the state elites and spread it through media.
To be honest, I'm not quite sure what you are you're asking me about the public reaction or okay. Well, the reaction again. When I said people passing by and spitting on the traitors' doors is not a metaphor. That is actually experience of these women on the street daily facing this kind of a reaction. The reason why they left was not just a few newspaper articles, it was actual people, neighbors who knew where they live, where they buy bread. I think Slavenka Drakulic was talking about how her mother was offended or ostracized on the street and things like that. So we are not talking only about the reaction. These have consequences. And I think that is the power of nationalism. That invites everyone, that everybody who belongs to the nation is morally obligated to defend the nation. And that, I think, is the reason why this kind of nationalist discourses have the power, because it invites everyone.
Dave, we have someone here at the front waiting for quite some time. Sorry.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed your presentation. I have one question, just taking from the case study of my own country. Did it translate in Croatian case something what became visible in Georgian case as a clash between, including setting the national political discourses, clash between old intelligentsia and new intellectuals, those who were produced, let's say, during Soviet times, and those later on who were educated in the West, came back, and the main problem, the former serving the powerful, the latter criticizing those in power. Thank you.
I think you're referring to in Croatia, well, in Yugoslavia. territories, it's poštena intelligentsia, the honest intelligentsia. Is that what you are referring to? Yes, yeah. Yeah. Poštena, like honest intelligentsia. That was kind of a Communist Party term, right? Yes, I mean, I didn't really want to enter another discussion, but the fact that these women had the voice, that they were considered to be, well, intellectuals, I think that they rubbed some people in the wrong way as well.
I'm going to abuse my position. I have two questions which are related to this. So I mean, it's a fascinating discussion, and I think a lot of the debate here now is about the gender aspect, but I think if I understand correctly your presentation, so we're talking about a number of different categories. Gender is only one of them, so we're talking about class. Obviously, these were prominent intellectuals. We're talking importantly about their position towards the Croatian liberation war, the homeland war. So is it because they were specifically targeted because they were women, or that was only one additional element because of what you were saying, the burden on women is bigger at the time of crisis because they have multiple functions to perform for the nation? And the second question is, I mean, the ethnic category you mentioned, some of them, you know, had ethnic background, Serb ethnic background, but also, was it the fact that they were also active in a cross-national, transnational setting, especially with the anti-war movement in Serbia, women in black, but also human rights activists, and of course they were part of that kind of activist movement. So did that also feature in the accusations that were made against them in the Croatian context?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. Maybe they wouldn't be targeted if they did not have that kind of powerful international voice. That's for sure. It's funny that literally one day before the article, the main articles, how Croatian feminists are raping Croatia, one day before, New York Times published Slavenka Drakulic article. It's called "A Rape is a Rape is a Rape." And her own writing was one of the triggers that, not one of many triggers, that forced International Crime Tribunal to include rape as a war crime. So they had her active participation in the debate about what is happening on the territory of Bosnia particularly contributed to raising awareness in the world of that seriousness of this kind of heinous crime that has to be recategorized as a war crime. Before that, it was not considered as such. So you cannot say that these women were not included. They were, according to certain national discourse, it had a wrong approach. Because Croatian nationalist discourse wanted to present this type of crime solely as Serbian tactics. Well, as we know, well, I don't want to enter that discussion. There is no point in doing that. So because they had a voice, they were the target. I quite agree with that. Now, can I just say one other thing? The other case study that I might one day turn my attention to, but I think that for me, most important is this process of estrangement, and it's happened very obviously in the case of Brexit. Not against feminism, against globalism. You have very, very the same. You have the notion of fat pigs. This was mostly Boris Johnson who came out with the trope of fat pigs. Do you remember any British around? Fat pigs was a term he attributed to old CEOs of multicultural, multinational companies, as those who are running, taking money from British companies and, you know, like taking away from British hands the economy, a British economy, who are run by multinational companies rather than Britain. So the whole rhetoric in Boris Johnson's speeches and writings mostly were about discrediting, right, or using very openly these kind of slander terms and so on to discredit the whole idea of globalism. very, very serious national. So you can see this similar trend of disqualifying particular ideology, right? That's what I was hoping to achieve here. Maybe not. To kind of to maintain nationalist discourse as the main and if not, well, predominant framework for kind of defining the boundaries of us and them, of our moral community, and everything else to be thrown on the other side of national morality.
Thank you. Dave, one at the back, and then we have two at the front here.
So where am I looking? Sorry, did you say one at the back? Oh, here.
Thank you for a fascinating talk. Two of your thoughts caught my attention. The power of nationalism, as you said, comes from the ability to police behavior, enforce moral norms. And you also mentioned some theories that said all nationalism is sexist. So I'm wondering if the exercise of power against the betrayer is also gendered. Now, I know you didn't look at male betrayers, but it's my impression from where I live in Lithuania that when a woman is a betrayer, it's usually the techniques that you said, so public shaming, what is the word, spectacle. But when it's a man, there is a sort of a crackdown or violence or fast justice of some sorts. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I did not do a proper content analysis of the writings of public media or mainstream media when the target was male. There is many famous Croatian male traitors. Rade Šerbedžija is one of them. I don't know, some of you might know. The problem in his case is that he was seen as ethnically Serb, from Croatia, but ethnically Serb, and kind of it's a different type of target. The writings were in public media were therefore much different, but I couldn't really attribute whether it's because he's a man or because he's perceived as Serb, therefore other. So I did not really touch that. The interesting thing for me is the accusers are both male and female. The writers of the newspaper articles, some I did not really show, but there are both male and female journalists who actively participated in writing incredibly misogynic kind of articles and so on. I would, for those of you, I would refer you to the book of Kate Manne. She is annoyingly brilliant, a young philosopher, down girl, who talks about misogyny and what misogyny is, and effectively understands misogyny as a method of policing sexist ideology. And it is not, the misogyny in her view is not directed towards women. Misogyny is not hatred of women. Misogyny is a way to punish and discipline some women. Women who don't know their place. Women who were too loud, too independent, too powerful, whatever. And that is used by both men, some men, and some women as a tactic. Those who think they do know what their proper place for a woman is. So when you talk about the, as I said, I cannot really say much about the targets of who is labeled, because the case study here was a little bit blurred boundaries of ethnicity, gender, and so on. But as from accusers, those action, again, agency, those who were writing those articles, they were both male and female, but they were all equally self-proclaimed nationalists.
Thank you very much. So just to briefly maybe mention to the question that was just asked about the male traders, if we expand the circle to the other Serbia movement, for example, you would have cases of Serbian intellectuals who themselves would write papers saying being a traitor. So it wouldn't be just a marker which is ascribed by the power. It's also something that is accepted by alternative circles as a self-ascribed marker. And this I know because I've been working on cultural elite in Yugoslavia and also Zagreb feminists already since my PhD fourth, but excuse me if my paper publication process is so ridiculously slow. When it comes to feminism and females as victims, I think feminist, of course, gives you the proper idea what they were targeted for and what the connotation was about. But also, I think it also blurs many victims which were also attacked, although they weren't feminists. For example, even before Mira Furlan, you would have a case of the Croatian journalist Serbian, right? Miloš Tula, who then fled to Serbia and was also labeled as a whore, although she had nothing to do with feminism. So, because you were talking about feminism so much, I missed in your talk the reference to Anna Miškovska-Kajovska and the way she basically showed the clashes in the Zagreb feminist movement and then the Serbian feminist movement, because some of the Zagreb feminists became supporters of nationalism, right? So the examples that you gave were just examples of the most prominent figures, which in other examples also in Globus and in other papers would also be attacked not as women but as remnants of remnants of red bourgeoisie, for example. So it wouldn't be just their marriage. Yes, it would be the most striking thing that remains in our consciousness. It would be they are attacked because they're married to Serbs, but they're also attacked because their siblings are diplomats, and they're attacked because they're well off, and they're attacked because they travel and other people don't travel. And so another thing that comes to mind when you started this talk with Mira Furlan, and of course her question about how many friends you need to betray to just like avoid betraying a nation. What comes to mind is Lila Gandhi's framework, right? Because she basically does her theory on Edward Forster and his question. It's not even a question, it's a statement. He's afraid, right? He knows in two Cheers for Democracy, he knows that it's hard to choose between a nation and a friend, and he says, I hope I would have the guts. I hope I would have the guts to keep my friend and not to betray my friend, and rather just stay loyal to my nation. So I was wondering if you ever had the wish to also expand this framework of betrayal that you were presenting with the framework of friendship, which is kind of my expertise. But also the last question before I leave you alone. Yeah. So, did you also have some plans to expand your case studies on Serbian examples? So, as I said, I mentioned Filip David, for example, or there was this great Serbian journalist. What's Anica Lazin-Nonveje, right? Yeah, Anica Lazin-Nonveje, which again now we're going to see why friendship is so important. So she loses her job because on primetime radio in Belgrade, she airs a song, "Hey My Belgrade Friend." It's a Croatian song written by Jura Stublic, And it was a hit in Croatia because basically, although it can be understood as a peaceful song, it's also a song in which the Serb dies because the Croatian hits the Serb, right? I mean, shoots the Serb. And of course, the Serbs understood the shooting of the Serb, and so Anica Lazin Nonveje loses her job, and she's a victim of same kind of harassment as was presented on Furlan and on the Zagreb feminists. Only her case wasn't as famous because she didn't have such an international reputation as the Croatian feminists would have. But what is interesting is that, for example, if you would take Teofil Pančić, a leftist Serbian journalist.
We're running out of time.
I'll just like 1 minute. 1 minute. I'll finish. Yeah. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for your patience. I love you all. I really do.
After the
so Teofil Pančić, for example, when he would be ruminating about Furlan, he would juxtapose Furlan and Anica Nonveje. So he would take the Serb and the Croatian examples of the same symptom of nationalism. But thank you very much for your talk.
Well, I'm looking forward to reading your book. First of all, I'm sorry, I don't want to do anything with Serbs. I'm joking, but no, I'm not interested in expanding this because my topic is not feminism, my topic is nationalism. I'm interested in discourse of nationalism, and I don't think, well, I do acknowledge that there were many victims of the same discourse and same processes. I don't think that adding another examples that were numerous, and not only in Serbia, but throughout Bosnia and so on, that would add to my view that nationalism has this power as a discourse to eliminate competitors through proclamation of national traitors. So I absolutely acknowledge that this happened to many people, not only in Croatia, but this was, in my view, just a case study of the wider kind of a process that can be now applied to any specific situations.
Thank you. We have time for one last question here.
I have a short question, but sure. I guess that the answer may be a bit longer. So I guess from your presentation that you are making a claim that nationalism is special in the case of the power to destroy other ideologies and push them away from the nation. So my question is, what makes it special? So why nationalism? Why no communism, no liberalism? Why?
But can I quote Steve Mock? I know it's going to be absolutely weird, but yeah. I'm asking Steve Mock. Steve Mock said because we are here talking about nationalism, but no, I'm joking. To be honest, you know, every time I read this notion that nationalism is the most kind of the strongest, the most powerful ideology and things like that, you heard some of the reasons why. Because it can adapt, it can, some use a term thin ideology, some use this ability to metamorphose and things like that. It has power of, in my view, to eliminate, to, you know, I don't think it's the strongest ideology. I think sexism is. I think that's the strongest, so powerful that we don't even notice it, how powerful it is. And then only some societies now start to think about it as, you know, like something that has to be changed, addressed, and so on. But that's another story, right? But yes, in our circles of people who deal with nationalism, we start with kind of think about nationalism that has this power, and I think it is because I think it definitely involves the very notion of identity, of issues of who we are, of you know. On the first page of Ernst Gellner's book, Nations and Nationalism, everybody knows the first definition of nation. I'm quite sure that in this audience, everybody would be able to recite his definition of of nationalism as political principle, right? That holds that the political boundaries have to be more or less match cultural boundaries, to paraphrase. In the same kind of first page, he says that nationalism is a sentiment that is, if those principle is not matched, if these boundaries do not match, then it's a sentiment of anger. Right? That's in the first page of his book. And I always thought about, we know that the borders and boundaries never match, right? There is always this mismatch between political borders and cultural boundaries. So it always made me wonder, was he really telling us that nationalism is all about anger? And this ability to rise this sentiment of anger in all of us. Maybe that's the reason why it's so powerful.
Talking about anger, I know some of us are getting hangry, so we'll have to stop here. Please join me in thanking Gordana for a great presentation and stimulating discussion. And feel free to approach her with questions after the panel. Just one small point. Dave has an announcement about some logistical issues.
So just some admin announcements. As you're moving around the building, there's no access between the two sides of the building on the first floor. So if you want to go to the first floor, use the lifts on this side. If you want to go to the third floor, use the lifts on that side. Dinner this evening for people who have signed up is at Városliget. If you're going from here, it takes about half an hour, so do leave enough time to get there. The Meet the Editors event will be taking place in here in about 10 minutes. The film showing this evening is also in here, if you'd like to go to that. And for people who asked for participation certificates yesterday, they're on the desk. If you ask for them today, they'll be available tomorrow. Thank you very much.